The introduction of the fast ferry service in Trinidad and Tobago has revolutionized the country's inter-island transports. In 2.5 to 3 hours, you are at your destination and back home by nightfall. The transition started in 2005, and today, the TNT Spirit, the TNT Express, and the cargo boat, the Warrior Spirit, are making life a whole lot easier for the people of Tobago in particular. The Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago is answering the call from citizens to supply 21st century service, world-class and very affordable.
And they have all the luxuries that you can find in any top-class cruise liner. Cafes, bars, luxurious seating accommodation, luxurious walk-in space. And it is the ultimate.
Of course, more and more sea transport is critical to our twin island development. And Tobago depends largely on Trinidad for goods, for its daily operations and to a larger extent services. Most of this has to be transported with our ferry service.
At first beginning I thought I was on an airplane with these sorts of airplane seats that you can recline. The price is right. You're over 60 and you're going on free. What a better deal you can get with that.
I use the ferry service because number one, it's very economical. Number two, the service tends to be very lovely. And it's smooth sailing, and I happen to love the ocean.
Judging from my information, that this ferry service carries more passengers than any other ferry service within the Caribbean. I've even heard comments from my colleagues in Canada. They wish they were happy they had this kind of crowd, 1 million passengers.
In fact, we did not recognize the potential of the sea bridge to the tourism sector until the fast ferry service came into being. Tourism and the sea bridge are not as closely intertwined as they are at this point in time.
For centuries, Tobago businesses had to seek private shipping arrangements, which were always inconsistent. It was the turn of the 20th century that things began to change.
So in 1901, the government shipping service first began with a few vessels. However, these vessels were not up to the task. And by 1924, the government of the day hired what was referred to as the SS Belize.
The steamship Belize operated for 5 years before the introduction of the SS Tobago and the SS Trinidad in 1930. Both had the capacity for just over 300 passengers and 400 tons of cargo. They ran the route for 26 years before being retired by the government.
In fact, the name even before government shipping service was coastal steamers. The name implied what they did. They actually sailed around the coasts of both Trinidad and Tobago and carried people and goods and so on, because as you would expect, the road infrastructure in those days was nothing compared to what it is now.
They came in on Tuesday morning, dropped off passengers and light cargo, and then they left and they went eastward, and I think they made 8 different ports. Sometimes you got in a port when the sea was rough, and to think that those stevedores with things like a bag of rice was like 178 pounds. And you had a bag of sugar, 224 pounds, and they had to carry that in on their head in the sea.
It was really, really excited. The boat used to go into Pembroke to take cocoa, because Pembroke had a very large cocoa estate. And the sea there would have been always very rough and tumbling, and the sailors would have been taking the cocoa from the boat. Sometimes, man, all the cocoa wet up and so on, because it was really, really tough and hard times. But then they will come up to Roxborough, because Roxborough had a massive estate with cocoa. Roxborough Sea is always bad too. Then they will go up to Kings Bay. Kings Bay Sea was a little better. There was a master estate called Kings Bay Estate. Then they will go into Speyside.
We turned back on many occasions until the weather cooled down. I remember the last trip the Trinidad made. I was the chief officer, right? And the captain was Captain Borden. Good. And while going through the Giles, She started rolling at about 15 degrees. The condenser low suction in the engine room. So the whole engine room was covered with pure steam. If I remember well, I think that's the last trip we made around the coast with the Trinidad.
And in those days, let me go back, the whole of the village would have come to the beach to look at the boat, that boat when it's coming in, bringing in flour and sugar and rice and cornmeal and butter and meat for us from Trinidad.
The era of the steamship service was coming to an end, which meant changes to the activities on the sea bridge. With no notice forthcoming from the harbour master, the Trinidad and the Tobago were taken off the route in a matter of 5 days. Tobago once again cut off from the rest of the world. The government then placed an order for 2 new vessels, the Bird of Paradise and the Scarlet Ibis. It would take more than 3 years before they arrived. In the interim, they chartered a number of vessels to make the Tobago run.
Bird of Paradise was the first one came. Good. And she took up the run and she was doing well. 1 year after, the Scarlet Ibis came and joined her and continued. At that time, I was promoted to tug captain. So I didn't go back on the coastal run. I remained on the tugs.
Despite the presence of the Bird of Paradise and the Scarlet Ibis, the wars continued, and it was common for passengers to find innovative ways to travel to Trinidad.
People would come in cars and we used to go in, let them go in to the ship, until we found that some of the taxi men would have people lie down in the car and you let them go in, and then those people going on board without tickets. So we had to stop vehicles, going in.
After 25 years, the Bird of Paradise and the Scarlet Ibis had done yeoman service for the country, but with demands higher than their capacities, they were eventually retired.
I came in just after the age of Scarlet Ibis and Bird of Paradise. And then, of course, you had the MF Tobago, you had the Gelton and Teaston, and then in came the Panorama in 1987, along with the Trinidad and Tobago Shipping Act.
I had the pleasure, as a Minister of Government at that time, in 1987, to go to Germany to bring the Panorama, the MF Panorama, to Trinidad and Tobago. The records would show that the MF Panorama transported approximately 700 passengers on every trip that it took between Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, it took more cargo.
With the arrival of the Panorama, there was one piece of the puzzle missing. There wasn't a local seaman with the qualifications required. The distinguished Captain Herman Ashton was called out of retirement.
I obtained a master foreign going certificate from London. Good. And that was the covering certificate for the Panorama. Well, she was modern, she was fully equipped, she was fast, she keep you alert and everything. She make you more of a seaman.
Times were changing. Passengers wanted less time on the ocean and a quicker time to their destinations. In 1994, the Condor, a fast ferry, was introduced to the traveling public. The time was impressive, but the result did not go down well with the passengers. After 3 months, the service was discontinued.
And then you had different iterations coming after that. For instance, when the Panorama had to go on dry dock, the Beauport, and other traditional ferry vessels that we brought in to replace the Panorama and or Tobago when they had to go on dry dock.
When the Sonia was here, you wouldn't like to see the amount of people that were traveling. And I find that was the best thing that had ever happened to Tobago. And I was hoping and praying that they had kept that boat, because the Warrior Spirit was bringing load, yes, but that boat was bringing double.
Even though the MV Sonia was a state-of-the-art vessel with all the modern cruise facilities you would find on any luxurious cruise liner today. It did not travel as fast as either the Cat or the Lynx to get from Trinidad to Tobago or from Tobago to Trinidad.
The Lynx and the Cat paved the way for the TNT Spirit and the TNT Express.
And that is something I think of which we're very proud, because we, the Tobago House of Assembly, in fact, after doing some research and approached by an entrepreneur, we saw this as something that we should in fact attempt to introduce between Tobago and Trinidad. Send our people up to Tenerife to see how it operated. We got very excited about it, and we were finally able to convince the central government.
Before the fast ferry service was introduced, the journey took 5.5 to 6 hours on average. With the fast ferry, it now takes 2.5 to 3 hours. I remember in those years we were transporting like 300,000 passengers per annum. Right now we are transporting 1 million per annum.
We had a meeting with the company Bay Ferries that assist us in operating the 2 fast ferries. And they pointed out that the Spirit and the Express, close to having a record of the most passengers within any specific time that have been accommodated on a single ship. So, you know, the ridership on both those vessels have been nothing short of phenomenal.
I'm actually very surprised with the accommodations. It's very modern, it's actually very nice, very clean.
Really impressed with the new seats on the ferry. You know, they have a good recline angle. I'm a retiree, I'm retired, so I don't really do a job of work. I just enjoy living in my country.
I walked into the boat and I was surprised to see the improvement that TNT Express have done to this boat. Now I'll be more comfortable.
Bay Ferries International are responsible for running and maintenance of the 2 ferries. The crew is a mixture of local and international technocrats.
We provide many of the personnel, the officers that work on board, that drive the ships. We are responsible for the physical well-being of the ship and the maintenance of the machinery, and repairs to all the machinery and the physical ship itself. We're responsible for certification of the vessels to be suitable for passenger travel.
This craft has 4 main engines, 9,500 horsepower apiece, so about 38,000 horsepower. Service speed that we keep around is approximately about anywhere from 32 to 35 knots. You can go faster, but we keep her at a engine rev about 950 revolutions.
Myself being the first master, I have a very good comrade, the first local chief engineer, Mr. Brendan Powder. He actually started about a year ago about the TNT Spirit. We also have local officers, second engineers and second mates and a chief mate as well. So we're slowly but surely getting to fulfill the mandate of having this craft fully manned by local officers.
I'm accustomed to conventionals where we go at, you know, like 1/3 the speed and pace of this year. But the navigation and the safety aspect are all the same. It's just the reaction time on the bridge is much less than on a conventional, and especially for those pirogues that we have on the north coast here. And you look, especially at twilight, you know, they're very difficult to distinguish. So sometimes you look and you don't see anything, but they just lost in the trough. And next, as you look again, you see one right in front of you, and you have to make a split decision. Or, you know, it could be life, you know, life-threatening for those guys out there. So you need to be switched on at all times.
But the service is good. The people of Trinidad and Tobago seem to enjoy it and use it quite well, because there's very seldom we won't max out on passengers or cars. So it is being utilized heavily by the public.